They laughed at him at the airport. But when they learned who he really was, the entire terminal went silent. You're watching Fallen Stories. Subscribe for more real tales of justice and redemption. It was another busy morning at Atlanta International Airport. The sound of rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, and hurried footsteps filled the air. Amid the rush stood one man, quiet, still, almost invisible. A black man in his early 50s, his clothes were worn from years of use. Old army boots. A faded green jacket. A heavy military backpack slung over one shoulder. His name was Marcus Hill. He didn't look like much to anyone passing by, just another tired traveler, maybe down on his luck. But what no one knew was that this man once commanded soldiers overseas, and saved lives most people could never imagine losing. As Marcus stood in line for the security check, the glances began. Quick stares. Whispered judgments. A young businessman in a tailored suit looked him up and down, then smirked. "Bro," he muttered loud enough for others to hear. "This isn't the bus terminal." A few people chuckled. Marcus didn't even look up. He just smiled faintly and adjusted his backpack. Inside, he was used to this. He'd seen worse, in deserts, in combat, in hospitals. He didn't need to prove himself to anyone here. But the crowd didn't see dignity. They saw what they wanted to see. When Marcus finally reached the airline desk, the woman behind the counter barely looked up. "Yes, sir?" she asked, impatiently. He handed her his ticket. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm on Flight 212 to Washington, D.C. She glanced at the ticket, frowned, and pointed across the terminal. "Economy line's over there." Marcus looked down at his ticket again. "Ma'am, this says—" She cut him off. "Sir, please. That's for premium boarding. You'll need to move." The businessman from earlier smirked from behind. "Man, these people always try to sneak up front," he said loudly. The employee cracked a tired grin. Marcus didn't argue. He just stepped aside, nodded slightly, and walked toward the line she'd pointed to. He looked at his watch, the same old watch he'd worn since deployment. Its glass was cracked, but it still ticked. Voice softens. That watch had counted every second of his tours. Every heartbeat of a man who'd seen both hell and home, and somehow made it back. The line crawled forward. People sighed and complained about delays, about coffee prices, about Wi-Fi. But Marcus just waited quietly, his eyes calm, patient. To him, waiting in a line was nothing compared to waiting for a helicopter that might never come. When he reached the TSA checkpoint, a guard frowned at his worn bag. "Sir, what's in the backpack?" "Just clothes and my notebook," Marcus replied. The guard opened it. Inside were folded shirts, a small American flag patch, and a thick notebook filled with handwritten names. The guard looked up. "Names?" Marcus smiled softly. "Friends." The guard raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. Marcus zipped the bag, nodded politely, and moved on. He found an empty seat near gate 17. Across from him, the businessman scrolled on his phone, chuckling with a friend. Marcus ignored it, quietly opening his notebook. Inside were pages and pages of scribbles, names, dates, tiny notes beside each one. Johnson smiled on the hardest day. Reyes didn't make it home. A small boy sitting nearby tilted his head. "What's that, mister?" Marcus looked up and smiled warmly. "These are the names of people who helped me come home." The boy blinked. "Come home from where?" Marcus's voice dropped, quiet but steady. "Afghanistan. Twice." The boy's mother looked over, uncertain. Some nearby passengers overheard. Whispers started again. "Afghanistan?" someone said under their breath. "Yeah, right. Looks homeless to me." Marcus heard every word, but said nothing. He'd learned long ago that silence speaks louder than shouting, and smiled faintly at a name written in bold. "Captain L. Hayes never stopped believing in me." Then, an announcement echoed through the terminal. "Attention passengers, Flight 212 to Washington, D.C. has been delayed 2 hours." Groans erupted all around. The businessman threw his hands in the air. You've got to be kidding me. I have meetings. Marcus simply leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. Peace wasn't easy to find, but he found it anywhere he could. Minutes turned into an hour. The businessman grew restless. He began sneaking glances again at Marcus, who now sat quietly, writing in his notebook. A smirk crept across the man's face. He lifted his phone, pretending to text, but his camera was recording. He whispered to a friend beside him. Check this out. This guy's claiming he's a vet, but looks like he can't afford a ticket. Cap or now? They both laughed. Within minutes, the clip was uploaded. Comments rolled in fast. Fake vet. Trying to get sympathy. Dude's probably homeless. The views climbed while Marcus sat just feet away, unaware that his face was spreading across social media. 15 minutes later, 2 airport security guards walked up. Sir, we need to ask you a few questions, one said. Marcus looked up, surprised. Is there a problem? Someone reported suspicious behavior, the guard said flatly. The businessman watched, hiding his grin behind his phone. Marcus reached into his jacket slowly, pulling out his ID. Marcus Hill. Retired Major, United States Army. The guard blinked, hesitated, and then shrugged. All right, sir. Just stay seated. Marcus nodded. Yes, sir. As they walked away, whispers filled the room again. Retired Major? Yeah, right. If he's retired Army, I'm the president. But one older woman sitting nearby frowned at them. She looked at Marcus with kind eyes. Don't mind them, son. Some
Marcus
folks just
smiled
don't
gently.
see what's in front of them. Thank you, ma'am. She noticed the patches on his old backpack, worn but real. Those are campaign patches, aren't they? She asked quietly. Yes, ma'am, he said. They are. She nodded slowly, understanding more than the others did. Time passed. People came and went. And Marcus remained, quiet, calm, steady. He opened his notebook once more and began to write something new at the bottom of the page. Never let pride make you forget patience. His handwriting trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from memory. He could still see the faces of men he'd lost, the dust storms, the distant sound of helicopters. And yet here he was, home. Still standing. But home wasn't always kind. The businessman, bored again, scrolled through his phone. His post had hit 5,000 views. He smirked, typing a comment. Still waiting for his private jet face with tears of joy. The irony would soon crush him. Because just beyond the glass windows, out on the tarmac, a private jet had just landed. Inside the terminal, a soft chime played. Attention passengers, Flight 212 boarding will resume shortly. Marcus looked up, closed his notebook, and took a deep breath. Something in his eyes changed, a quiet confidence returning. He stood, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and looked out the window. The businessman followed his gaze, confused. Who's that jet for? He muttered. Marcus's lips curved in the faintest smile. He checked his old cracked watch, the same one that had counted every battle, every breath. He whispered softly to himself. Right on time. The man everyone mocked was about to silence an entire airport. Moments earlier they laughed. Now they were seconds away from standing in awe. The terminal hummed with impatience. 2 hours of delay had turned chatter into frustration. People argued about boarding zones, flight credits, and coffee. But Marcus Hill stood by the window. The businessman scrolled on his phone, bored, waiting to capture another cheap laugh. Then, a low, distant rumble. Engines. Big ones? Outside the glass, 3 black SUVs rolled across the tarmac, their tinted windows glinting in the Georgia sun. They weren't ordinary airport shuttles. They moved with purpose, slow, coordinated, deliberate. A few passengers turned to look. Who's that for? Someone whispered. Probably some celebrity. The businessman chuckled. Maybe my guy here finally called an Uber Black. Laughter again. But this time, Marcus didn't smile. He just exhaled slowly, as if a weight he'd carried for years was about to set itself down. The SUVs stopped beside the private gate. From the lead car, a tall man stepped out, uniform crisp, medals gleaming in the morning light. A 4-star Army general. He looked around the terminal through the glass wall, scanning faces, searching. Then he saw Marcus. And everything changed. The general straightened his posture, heels clicking together. His hand rose sharply to his brow in a flawless salute. Through the window. Through the glass. Through the noise and the doubt. Silence fell across Gate 17. It rippled like a wave, conversations cutting mid-sentence, phones lowering, eyes turning. Every single person watched as the general held that salute. Marcus blinked once, then slowly turned toward him. He returned the salute, calm, precise, dignified. The businessman's jaw dropped. What the? The general walked briskly toward the door leading inside. Security guards snapped to attention, unsure what was happening. The airline employee who'd mocked Marcus earlier froze, eyes wide. The supervisor hurried to greet the general. Sir, can we? Where is Major Hill? The general demanded. Voice sharp, pointing toward Marcus. He's right there. The general moved past her without another word. Every eye followed him as he approached the quiet man everyone had dismissed. When he reached Marcus, he stopped, and saluted again. Permission to speak freely, sir, he said. Marcus nodded. Granted. The general's tone softened. We've been waiting for you. The entire terminal froze. You could have heard a pin drop. A little boy gasped. The businessman's phone slipped from his hand, clattering onto the tile. The older woman from earlier pressed a hand to her chest. Tears welled in her eyes. No one could make sense of what they were seeing. The man they'd mocked, the one who looked too poor to fly, was now being addressed as, Sir, by a 4-star general of the United States Army. Sir, the general continued, the Secretary of Defense is already aboard your flight. He asked me to personally escort you. Marcus nodded quietly, as though this wasn't the first time people had underestimated him. The airline employee, the same one who told him to move to the economy line, stood frozen behind her counter. Her face pale, lips parted. Marcus turned to her. Their eyes met. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to apologize, but words failed. He simply gave a small, forgiving smile. Always treat people, he said gently, like they've already served you. The words hung in the air, soft, steady, unforgettable. Then he picked up his old backpack and followed the general toward the private gate. The crowd parted instinctively as they walked. People stepped aside, some whispering, some bowing their heads in shame. The businessman couldn't move. His hands trembled as he picked up his phone, the same phone that had just mocked Marcus to thousands online. He opened his recording app, fingers shaking. The video he'd posted was still up. Thousands of comments, laughing emojis, insults. Now he knew the truth, and he couldn't take it back. To himself. What have I done? Marcus and the general reached the security gate. The guards who had questioned him earlier now stood at attention. Apologies, Major Hill, one said quietly. We didn't. Marcus stopped him with a raised hand. No need. You were doing your job. He passed through the gate, the old boots that had marched through sand and fire now echoing softly on the marble floor. The woman who'd shown him kindness, the older lady, called out after him, voice trembling. Major Hill, thank you for your service. He turned slightly, gave her a warm nod. Her eyes glistened with pride. Outside, the cold breeze met him as the terminal doors opened. The roar of the private jet's engines filled the air. An air stewardess in a navy uniform stood at the base of the stairs, clipboard in hand. She looked up as Marcus approached and smiled. Mr. Hill, welcome. The secretary is already aboard. Marcus nodded once. Thank you. The general gestured toward the plane. After you, sir. Marcus hesitated just a moment, glancing back through the glass wall. Inside, hundreds of faces pressed against the windows, passengers, workers, security guards. Even the businessman stood there, guilt heavy in his eyes. Marcus could have ignored them. But he didn't. He took one step back, raised his hand in a brief salute to the crowd. No anger. No pride. Just quiet grace. Then he turned and climbed the stairs. As the door closed behind him, the general followed. The engines roared louder. Heat shimmered off the tarmac. From the window, the businessman whispered to no one. He really was telling the truth. His friend beside him muttered. We judged him because of his clothes. The businessman nodded slowly. No, we judged him because of our ignorance. Back inside, the airline employee sank into her chair, still staring at the gate. Her manager approached quietly. Everything okay? She didn't answer. I told him to move to economy. She just whispered. Her voice cracked. The older lady, the one who defended Marcus, turned to her gently. You can't undo what you said, dear. But you can remember it. The employee nodded silently, tears starting to fall. On the runway, the private jet began to roll. Its silver wings caught the light as it turned toward the sky. From the window seats inside the terminal, people watched in awe. The same mouths that once laughed now whispered prayers and apologies. Children pressed their hands to the glass. Parents hushed them, realizing they'd just witnessed something they'd never forget. Inside the jet, Marcus sat quietly across from the Secretary of Defense, a man half his age, full of admiration. Major Hill, the secretary said, we're honored you agreed to meet. The President wanted to thank you personally for your work with Homefront Hearts. Marcus smiled faintly. I didn't do it for thanks, sir. I did it because too many of my brothers came home to nothing. The secretary nodded. And because of you, thousands now have something. Marcus looked out the small window. The airport below was shrinking, the clouds opening ahead. Let's hope the world remembers, he said softly. Back at gate 17, the businessman finally sat down. He opened his phone, stared at the cruel post he'd made, and hit delete. Then he opened a new post. Same video. Different caption. This man is Major Marcus Hill, Medal of Honor recipient and founder of Homefront Hearts, a nonprofit for homeless veterans. I judged him by appearance. I was wrong. He hit upload. Within minutes, the comments flooded in. Salute this man. I'm crying. This gave me chills. The businessman closed his eyes, whispering, I'll never judge someone like that again. Back in the clouds, Marcus leaned back, eyes closing. The hum of the engines was steady, peaceful. He thought about the faces he'd written in his notebook, the friends who didn't get to see this sunrise. For them, he whispered quietly. The jet cut through the morning light, climbing higher, leaving behind the noise, the laughter, and the judgment. Respect isn't about what someone wears, it's about what they've already given. And sometimes, the greatest heroes walk among us, quietly, humbly, unseen. Until the world finally remembers who they are. They say silence can shake an entire room. But that morning in the airport, it wasn't silence that froze everyone. It was respect, the kind that doesn't need words. The kind that can only be earned by what a man has already given. The automatic doors slid open near the private gate area. 3 black SUVs rolled in, engines low, lights flashing once before turning off. Uniformed officers stepped out, their posture sharp, their boots heavy against the floor. Every conversation in the terminal stopped. Passengers turned confused. Even the businessman who mocked Marcus earlier lowered his phone, his smirk fading as curiosity replaced arrogance. And then, from the middle of that group, stepped a man in full army dress uniform. Silver stars gleamed across his shoulders. A general. He scanned the crowd with intent, his eyes steady, searching. Then, he saw Marcus. And in that instant, something shifted. The general's expression softened. He took one slow breath, and then he saluted. A crisp, flawless salute that echoed across the quiet terminal. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Even the air seemed to pause. Marcus hesitated, almost embarrassed by the attention. He stood slowly, his knees stiff from years of carrying weight, not just physical, but emotional. He returned the salute, his hands steady. And the general, his voice firm, filled with emotion, said, "Permission to speak freely, sir. We've been waiting for you." The word "sir" hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Whispers rippled through the line. "Wait, what? Did he just call him sir?" The same airline employee who rolled her eyes earlier now stood frozen, a stack of boarding passes trembling slightly in her hand. Marcus smiled faintly, that same quiet dignity never leaving his face. He didn't gloat. He didn't stare anyone down. He simply nodded to the general and replied softly, "I told you I'd be here. Just didn't think I'd cause this much trouble." The general chuckled under his breath. "Sir, the secretary's already on board. They're eager to see you." That word again, secretary. It hung in the air like a revelation. The businessman blinked, eyes wide, watching as the soldiers positioned themselves around Marcus with subtle precision. Phones came out, but this time, they weren't mocking. They were capturing history. As Marcus walked past the security gate, the same guard who'd questioned his ID earlier stood aside and murmured, "My apologies, Major Hill." Marcus just placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "You were doing your job, son. Just remember who might have done theirs before you." He said it kindly, genuinely, and that made it sting even deeper. Outside, the sun had just begun to break through the clouds, a soft orange glow spilling across the tarmac. The private jet waited, sleek and silent, the American flag painted near its tail. As Marcus approached, one of the flight attendants stepped forward, her posture respectful, her voice steady but emotional. "Mr. Hill, sir, the Secretary of Defense is waiting for you on board." The businessman, now standing at the window inside the terminal, dropped his phone. The same device he'd used to humiliate Marcus hours ago slipped from his shaking hands. He whispered under his breath, "Oh my God, what have I done?" Marcus paused at the jet's stairway, looking back one last time. The crowd inside the terminal was pressed against the glass, dozens of faces that had judged him only moments ago. He didn't look angry. He didn't look proud. He turned to the same airline worker who'd mocked him earlier. She stood there, tears quietly forming in her eyes. Marcus spoke softly, but his voice carried through the glass like truth itself. "Always treat people like they've already served you." And with that, he turned and climbed the steps. Every bootstep echoed with the weight of everything he'd endured, every stare, every whisper, every doubt. At the top, he stopped, took one slow breath. And as he entered the jet, the doors closed behind him. The engines began to hum. The plane rolled forward, sunlight glinting across its wings. And in that golden reflection, for a split second, it almost looked like the flag itself was rising into the sky. Soft piano fades in, the reflective tone begins. The businessman sat down in silence. For the first time, he didn't reach for his phone. Didn't scroll. Didn't post. He just stared out the window, lost in thought. In that moment, the camera of the world had turned, and this time, it wasn't laughing. 2 days later, the same video he'd posted online, the one mocking Marcus, reappeared. But now, it had a new caption. "This man is Major Marcus Hill, Medal of Honor recipient, founder of Homefront Hearts, a non-profit helping homeless veterans find their way home." Within hours, the clip exploded across the internet. Millions of views. Thousands of comments. "Salute this man. I'm crying. We judged him too soon. Heroes walk among us every day, we just don't see them." The businessman's name wasn't mentioned. Instead, he didn't want to post something else, a written apology. "To Major Hill, and to every veteran I ever overlooked. I'm sorry. You showed more strength in silence than I've shown in my whole life." As the clip spread, news outlets picked it up. Veterans across the country shared their own stories in the comments. Messages flooded Homefront Heart's website, donations, letters, prayers. And somewhere in D.C., Marcus Hill sat quietly in a small office filled with photos, men and women in uniform, smiles frozen in time. He looked at one picture in particular, a younger version of himself standing beside his old unit. He traced the edges with his finger, smiled faintly, and whispered, We made it home, boys! We finally made it home! We see uniforms and medals and forget. Sometimes, the greatest heroes wear neither. Respect isn't about what someone looks like. It's about what they've already given. So the next time you pass someone who seems invisible, look closer. You might be standing in the presence of a hero. This was Fallen Stories. Subscribe for more real tales of justice, respect, and humanity.